Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for the highly anticipated follow-up from Mike Flanagan, of course being The Haunting of Bly Manor. So what The Haunting of Bly Manor is essentially about is basically we center on the character of Dani. She is this American that basically is being looked at as a new au pair. She's going to nanny two kids that have recently lost their parents while their uncle is away on business, basically. So she goes into this this mansion, of course, known as the Bly Manor, and very quickly starts to realize that there is something more going on than meets the eye, and that there is clearly a sinister force at play. So, The Haunting of Bly Manor overall, I was so hyped for this show. I mean, aside from a few other shows this year, this was easily one of my top anticipated, and it's not just because of how much I adore Mike Flanagan, it's really because of what came before it, The Haunting of Hill House, which, in my opinion, is one of the greatest horror things I've seen, or just pieces of television I've seen, period. I think what Flanagan was able to do with that show, the amount of emotion he was able to put into it, the impact it had, the amount of scares that were in there. I mean, there's just so much that was memorable about that show. And I will say this right now, asking anything to follow up to that, you know, it's going to be a disappointment, because that first, that first series was so good, and anything following it up obviously was going to be a disappointment for some people. So going into Bly Manor, I was very excited though to see what else Flanagan could deliver on, because I think he truly is one of the best working today. I think he's only gotten better as time has gone on. I did not go into it expecting to get the same thing as Haunting of Hill House. And honestly, after watching Bly Manor, I really could not have been more impressed with the way this turned out. This is another really fantastic series from Flanagan that is every bit as rich, it's every bit as dense as what came before it, but also gets to show a new side of him that we really haven't seen before, and just overall is one of my favorite things I've seen this year in general, but we're just gonna get into it right now. Now, similar to that first season, the thing that works so well about it, of course, is the cast here, and same goes for this season. I mean, just the amount of talent that Flanagan is able to find is just astounding to me. There are so many amazing performances within this show, but we, of course, first have to talk about Victoria Pedretti, who thankfully takes the lead here, which I'm very happy to see, because she, for me, was the big standout in Hill House, and her character of Dani this season is a little bit different. Dani is someone that, yes, has gone through her own past, clearly, that does very much haunt her, but there's a lot more going on with her. She's someone that is trying to be a positive force in the kid's life, and she's trying to, keep her head held as high as possible. She's trying to make sure that she can be as sane as possible, and I really just found myself loving her performance this time around, because again, it is very different from the character of Nell. Dani's someone who is a lot more positive. Dani is someone that tries to make an impact on characters' lives, but she also does a really good job, I think, as the leading woman of this series, because you really do find yourself sort of feeling similarly to her. At first you go into this manor and you're very much loving what's going on, but then very quickly there are things that are throwing you off, and every so often you feel like maybe there's just something off about what's going on, and I think the way that Pedretti was able to do that was fantastic, especially where she ends up going in the back half of the season. I think she is just such a phenomenal actress, and I think moving forward, I mean, she has a bright future ahead of her. She already proven that she did in Hill House, but Bly Manor shows anything really to show how great she is at leading something like this, and I hope moving forward that we get to see more of her. Whatever Flanagan ends up doing moving forward, I hope that Pedretti is somehow part of it, because I just love her as an actress, and this just solidified my love for her as an actress overall. And then similarly, in a very different role this time, is Oliver Jackson-Cohen as the character of Peter Quint, who I thought was just phenomenal here, because you look at his character in Hill House, and this character is really nothing like that. Peter Quint is someone that is very deceitful. Peter Quint is not really a good person, very much at all. It's a very different kind of role for Cohen, but Cohen is very quickly showing showing just how talented of an actor he is. This is such a multifaceted and just a truly transformative actor. He's able to really do anything. Every performance I've seen him in, he has just absolutely blown me away. I don't really think he's had a weak role yet, and I hope he continues to get more stuff, because since Hill House, I really haven't seen him done anything aside from like The Invisible Man and this, and if this shows anything, he really can pull off any role, and I just absolutely loved what he ended up doing here. The way he's able to make you even somewhat identify with this character, a character that really is just a horrible person, the way he's able to do that, I think is just phenomenal. Every emotion you feel from him, every single, you know, sort of tragedy that he's gone through, you really do feel with him, and I think Cohen just did such an incredible job with this character, and I really loved his performance throughout the show. He was absolutely incredible, and Henry Thomas as well, I think gives a very, very strong performance here. Again, very different from what he did in Hill House, but I was very impressed by his work here. But for me, it really is the new actors that I think really stand out this time around. As much as I love Pedretti and Cohen, I think that the newer actors, the newer ensemble, those are the real standouts of this season, especially when it comes to Amelia Eve, who just I thought was such a revelation in this show. She reminded me very similarly of Victoria Pedretti, someone that, to my knowledge, had very little acting experience going into Hill House. She had like just gotten out of college and she got that role, and I think the same thing has happened with Amelia Eve here. I don't think that this is a very well-known actress. At least I really haven't seen her in much of anything before. If she has, then great, but to my knowledge, I mean, I really haven't seen her much of anything, and I really hope I do after this show, because I think she did such a great job as this character of Jamie, someone who is very soft-spoken, but she's very wise. She has a lot of knowledge of what's been going on. She has her own past that she's going through, and she forms a very close relationship with one of the characters in this series, and you really do find yourself identifying with her. She's easily one of the best characters in this show. I really loved where she ended up going throughout the series, and I just thought she was absolutely phenomenal. She had so many amazing scenes throughout the show, and I truly do think is Emmy-worthy. I don't think she's going to get any recognition, unfortunately, but I really hope she does, because I think she really just shows just how incredible of an actress she really is, and I hope she's recognized somehow. And then Tania Miller, though, as well, is the other one that was just, holy shit. Tania Miller in this show is on another level, because this is a character that the second you're introduced to her, you can tell that there's just something off about her. You don't really know what's going on, and the way that Miller very slowly starts to let you in on what's going on with her as a character. Her acting starts to change, you know, the way that she reacts to certain things, I just thought was phenomenal as the character of Hannah. Someone that cares so deeply about these children, cares so deeply about everything that's going on around her, and I just adored every single thing that she was doing. I think she's absolutely one of the big standouts of this entire series. I loved pretty much everything about her as an actress, and she just remained a huge standout throughout, especially in the 5th episode of this show. Holy shit, she really gets some amazing stuff to do, and it's definitely going to be one of the most memorable things about this series. Again, I'd love to talk about it more, but we'll talk about it in the spoilers and things like that, but I just loved everything that she ended up doing here. But the other two performances that I really do need to recognize in this series are the two kids that are in here, because something that I thought Flanagan did such a great job with in Hill House is casting child actors that are very talented, casting child actors that know what they're doing, and as good as the child actors were in Hill House, the work that Amelie Bia Smith and Benjamin Evan Ainsworth do in this show, I think is honestly unmatched, because while they start off as these kids that are just very innocent and welcoming, and you really do find yourself being enchanted by them, we quickly realize that there's a lot more going on with them than we think. And once we realize what it is, they have a lot more to work with than you really do think. And it is so impressive to me the way they were able to pull this off almost flawlessly, especially on a rewatch. I can't imagine how it would be to watch their performances, because like I said, there's a lot more that they need to work with besides just being kids. There's more going on there, and I thought they did such an amazing job in this show. I was so impressed by both of them, especially Ainsworth. I mean, he is going to be something big someday. We're definitely going to see him in more moving forward, or at least we do. At least I hope we do, because I think this is on the level of, like, the greatest child performances out there. What he's able to do in this show is nothing short of remarkable, and I really loved his acting throughout the show. Again, there's some really great child actors out there, and it can be very hard to find them, but somehow Flanagan, he just manages to find the best actors possible for every single role, and that's something else that I really can say about Bly Manor. This ensemble is just so talented. Everyone just delivers to their fullest potential, even smaller roles, like, say, Kate Siegel, who shows up for, like, a couple episodes. I don't want to say who she plays, but, like, she's amazing in this show. You know, Catherine Parker, who shows up, I think she does some incredible work. There are just so many amazing performances throughout the show. I honestly think this ensemble is just as talented, if not more talented, than the one that came before it, and it's just a real credit to just how good Flanagan is with casting her, because everyone I thought was just spot on in this show. But now we got to get to the directing and the writing, which I think is one of the things that impresses me the most about this show, because something that you need to know going into The Haunting of Bly Manor is that it is absolutely nothing like the previous show that came before it. And you know what? I'm happy that it's not. And here's the thing, you know, yes, it is an anthology series, and yes, it is following up Hill House, but let's look at American Horror Story, for example. That's the original conceit of that show, is that it was going to be something different every single season. And I think we can all agree, you know, as far into that show as it is, it really hasn't changed all that much. You know, it's very much stayed the same thing. It's been a lot of similar type of characters, and it just hasn't. And while I think there were definitely some deviations here and there, I think that it's mostly stayed the same. This, on the other hand, really isn't at all. In fact, this isn't really a horror show. It's way more of a gothic romance, and I wouldn't really have it any other way. And so I think it was actually a really wise choice in this season that, although Flanagan obviously still has a huge voice behind what happens, he's not the singular voice telling the story. There are a lot of episodes this season that he doesn't direct. He only directs the first episode, and I was a little worried going in that would be a knock to the quality of the show, that, like, we would be able to feel that he isn't as, like, involved in this. But honestly, I think it makes it that much better, because I think Flanagan wanted other directors to, you know, he thought that they would be the better voice for the show, and I think it was definitely the right choice, because though the show definitely does still have a lot of creepy elements throughout it, the horror is still very much there. It always has a romantic quality to it. You know, you always get the sense that that is what's coming first. Everything in the show is centered around different types of relationships, and I think the tone is just so well realized here. It definitely has a lot of very good romantic moments, but it also is very tragic. There are a lot of sad moments throughout this season, and honestly, every single one of them hit me more than I really thought they were going to. I think the directing for this season is just so good. I think it was something where they all realized that they couldn't just do Hill House again. They needed to do something different, and I think as a result, it's at points even more effective than Hill House was. There are moments in this show that definitely hit me as hard as Hill House did, and not in terms of scares. The scares are there, definitely, but in terms of the you know, sad and tragic and just emotional aspect to it, it definitely is still there. And I think that really is a real credit to the directing here. I think all the directors did an incredible job. I really do love the way the show is helmed, and I think really it was the best choice for Flanagan to step back for a little bit, because again, he knows that, and this is something that a lot of directors have an issue with, is that they feel like they have to be involved with everything, and I think it was honestly a wise choice for Flanagan to let others tell the story for a little bit, you know, and have him step back. He can still tell them what needs to happen, you know, still have a roadmap of what needs to happen, but they are the ones telling the story, and I thought that was a very, very impressive move for sure. So brilliant directing from Flanagan, as always. I think the writing to this show, though, as well, though, is just so great, because here's the thing. Going into the show, you know, I think a lot of people are going to think about the Crane family, and they're going to miss the Crane family at first, but for me, that really wasn't the case, because I knew going into this was going to be different, and I appreciate the fact that it's something different, but I honestly forgot just how good, you know, Flanagan is at writing characters. I didn't realize until the season was going on just how attached I was becoming to some of these characters. They really do feel like three-dimensional beings. There's no character in this show that feels one-dimensional. Even the worst possible characters, like, say, Peter Quinn, such a horrible and just toxic presence in this show, you still feel empathy for him. You still do feel something for him. They don't try to not give him a backstory, and I think that was very impressive. Or let's say our main character, Danny. Danny is not just this, like, perfect girl. There are things that she has gone through in her life that she has deep regrets about, and the show isn't afraid to, you know, kind of to lean you into that, and I think they do a really good job with that. Or say the character of Hannah Gross, there's more going on with her, and that's something that I was definitely very impressed by. Or even the children in this show, there's more going on there. Every single character just feels so rich and complex, and I really loved the way that the writing was done here. And yes, there are similar themes that Hill House had. Definitely, there's similar themes. Themes about death, themes about, you know, regrets. Those are still in there. But this season is looking at things from a different perspective. It's more focused on the idea of immortality. And is that something that you really want in life? You know, if you are given this, you know, what do you really do with that? But also the idea of love and what that can do to a person. You know, does love conquer all in the end? Or is that something that, you know, doesn't work out as well as you want it to? And I think those themes are very well done throughout this season. I think the idea of legacy and things like that, those are also big themes here, and I think all those themes, they just feel so well realized. Every single character, again, really just feels like they have such depth to them, more than you're really expecting. You know, you might go into the season thinking that characters are going to start a certain way, but they really don't turn out that way, and I think that was very impressive, the way the story was told. And similar to Hill House, it takes a while to really get there, and that's not a problem at all. I love the fact that this show is very slow-paced. I like that it took a long time to get to certain points with these characters, because I feel like had we gotten it immediately, it would not be nearly as impactful as what we get. For example, episode 5, there is a huge revelation regarding one of these characters, and it really changes the entire framework of the show up to that point. You look at the show in a whole new way. It recontextualizes everything. And had they done this from the beginning, I just don't think it would have been as impactful. I don't think I'd be looking at this and praising it the same way I was had they do it from that angle. So I think it was the smartest move for them to decide to do it in that way, decide to really just slowly ease you into things, and I was very impressed by the way they decided to go about it. And like I said, the scares are very much there too. There are definitely some very creepy moments throughout the show, and I think the lore is very well incorporated. I know that they end up using a lot of Henry James's work, and obviously I'm not a big book reader, so I don't know too much about his source material, but I think that it was all incorporated very nicely. This did not at any point feel like they were doing too much. It felt like they were doing just enough. Everything just kind of fits in there perfectly, and I don't know how they're able to do it. I really don't know how, but it feels like everything was building up to a certain thing. There's always a connective tissue in there. There's always something to unravel, and it never feels like this is coming out of left field. It never feels like something that we didn't need. It all just kind of links together, and again, it's just so impressive to me the way they're able to do that, because I have seen so many shows that have tried to tie things together and it just feels messy. But the way this show is able to do it, similar to Hill House, it all just kind of works, and I think it's really smartly written the way they were able to do that. The dialogue as well is just so good to this show. There are so many lengthy monologues that could easily get boring, but the way that they go about it, they just make it work so well, and it's because, again, of how much time they get you to really flesh out all of these characters. So when they have these big monologues or when these big revelations are happening, you really do give a shit. You really do feel attached to it. I honestly was on the verge of tears multiple times in this show. I did cry at points in this show because, again, these characters just, they felt so, you know, they felt so close to you. You feel like you have a bond with them, and I think that's something that they're just able to do so well with, and it did take me a little while, but I honestly did find myself just as attached to these characters as the characters in Hill House. In fact, I think some of them are even a little bit more interesting than some of the characters in Hill House, which is saying a lot, because I think Hill House is pretty much a perfect show in that way. I think it's a perfect piece of media, and I think Bly Manor definitely does a really great job of attaching you to the characters in the same way. And again, the way they tell these stories, really all involving romance, I think are really well done. Every single one of them, I think you will find yourself attached to, and I think they did a really great job with that overall, this show. So again, I think the writing is just absolutely fantastic here. And like I said, it does take a while to ease into the plot. You might think for a little bit there isn't a lot happening, and I've heard some people complain about that, but for me, I think that it only speaks to how good the writing really is, because they don't want to throw everything at you at first. They really do want you to take the time to, you know, build the world a little bit, which that's something else I thought was very impressive, is that obviously, this is a much different setting than the original show. It takes place almost entirely in the 1980s, and it's done very smartly. I think the way that they incorporated the 1980s setting was really well done, and having everyone show up with, like, these British accents, you know, it's gonna throw some people off, but I think that it was the smart thing to do, because again, it shows that they can do other things. They can tell other stories, and these characters, again, the ones that are coming back are very different from the characters we had in Hill House. Henry Wingrave is nothing like the character that Henry Thomas played in Hill House. You know, Peter Quint is certainly nothing like Luke in Hill House. It's a far cry from him. Danny is nothing like Nell. But it only speaks to not just the talent of these actors, but the credit of the writers, that they're not just trying to, you know, use these actors in a way that feels one note. You know, they're not just trying to do the same thing. They're really trying to get these actors to do something different. They're really trying to get us to watch something different, and I really did appreciate that a lot. So again, I think the writing is just absolutely superb here, and I really couldn't ask for anything better. The cinematography in this show, though, again, is just absolutely astounding. There are so many amazing shots here, and similar to Hill House, there's a lot of similar techniques that they do. Like, for example, a lot of the ghosts and, you know, spirits and things like that are hidden in the background. We don't notice them at first, but once you get to later episodes, you'll start to notice that they were there all along, and it makes it very creepy, but it also, again, is just really impressive the way they were able to pull it off. I think the look of the manor as well is really well done. It's very big. There's a lot of memorable locations there. There's a lot of rooms where you don't really know what's going on at first, and you want to know more about. I think that the look of Bly Manor is just as interesting as the look of Hill House. And I know some people were worried that, oh, it's another, you know, house again. Is this going to be the same thing? It's really not. You know, the look of Bly Manor is very different from the look of Hill House, and what happens in Bly Manor works very differently than it worked in Hill House. And I think they also are playing around a lot more when it comes to certain things with the cinematography. There's an episode in this show that really plays to the color palettes, and I can't say how. I don't want to spoil it, but it's very impressive the way they were able to. There's an episode that's almost entirely in black and white. There is an episode that really focuses on the there are moments that really change aspect ratios and things like that. You can really tell they're trying to go all out with the cinematography, and it's one of the best things about this entire show. There are just so many shots that are ingrained in my mind. There are so many little motifs that they do, and again, it really just speaks to the genius of the show. So I think the cinematography is fantastic here. The score as well by the Newton brothers. I mean, I've credited these guys enough. They're some of the best horror composers out there. The score that they did in Hill House was one that I thought was just so, it was something that was so euphoric. It was something that I couldn't get out of my head, and that's very much the same thing when it comes to Bly Manor. And yes, they use very similar tunes to Hill House, but the way that they specifically use the tune of "Oh Willow Whaley," that is really the theme of the season, I think is genius. They use it in so many different ways, and it becomes something that you'll hear one way, and then you'll hear it completely differently at the end of the season. And I think the score, similar to the first season, is honestly kind of telling its own story. It's a part of the story, honestly, and I think it's very impressive the way they were able to do that. And the editing for this season, I think, is also pretty much perfect. This season is only 9 episodes long. It's 1 episode less than the first one, and I think the story was as well fleshed out as it really could have been. I think the slow pace nature of the show really did work. I was into it pretty much the whole time. There wasn't really a moment where I found myself drifting off or not as into what was going on, and I really think that they just really nailed everything when it came to pacing this season. Especially the last few episodes are pretty much perfectly paced in my opinion, and I couldn't really ask for again for them to do anything different there. So I think the editing is fantastic in this show. And really just, there's so many things to love about this season. I think there's so much that it does do right. There really is only one thing I think that does bring this down for me. There really is only one thing I think that does bring this down from being just shy of Hill House, and that is this. While every single character I think the show does a good job with of fleshing out, there is one character in Jamie that doesn't really get the focus that I wish she did. She has a really good lengthy monologue, and I think that they do a good job with that, but I would have liked her own individual episode. She's the only character in the show that doesn't really get one. Every other character kind of does, and she doesn't really, and I thought that was a little disappointing. I would have liked to see a little bit more there. There's a really great monologue she has, but I would have actually liked to see that play out, and I think that slightly brought things down for me. But now, of course, we are going to jump into spoilers, which, I mean, again, where do we begin? There's so much to talk about in terms of spoilers here, and I really do want to talk about all of it. I think the first thing I really do want to get into is, of course, the revelation with Hannah, because we knew there was something going on with her, from the beginning of the show. She's not eating, she's not drinking, she doesn't really, no one physically touches her, there's no, physical interaction there. When she's with Owen, it feels like there's, a bit of a disconnect, and so we get the revelation in the 5th episode that she's actually been dead since the beginning of this show, and I thought that just made things so much more clear. There was so much more clarity when it came to her character, because again, it always felt like there was just something off about her. Especially, I mean, the first scene we see of her is literally her looking into a well, and we don't know what's going on there, and now we know that's her looking at her dead body and realizing that, holy shit, I'm actually dead. And I think the way that they tied into that, and the way that that really changes the rest of the show, I think is really well done, because we did see a few characters die prior, but we didn't really see what happens to them after that. Like, say, Peter Quint, for example. Like, we knew that Peter, died in the house, but we didn't really get to see what happened to him after that. He just kind of came back, and now we're seeing what did happen, that Hannah's basically living a life that's on loop. She's stuck in these scenes that she was never even a part of. She's kind of stuck in this endless time loop, and it's really devastating to watch. It's probably one of the most, horrifying things of the entire show. Again, while this isn't fully horror, I think things like that really speak to the horrific nature here, because just the idea of being trapped in this time loop and not really being able to do anything about it, and everyone around you, while you're interacting with them, you can't really interact with them because they're dead. Wanting to move to wanting to move elsewhere with Owen, wanting to go away with Owen, and then her not being able to because Owen's alive and she's dead, and so there's a bit of a, there's a bit of an issue there. I think stuff like that is just really saddening, and I think, again, it's also pretty scary as well, and I really like the way that was handled. But some of the other things I really enjoyed is, of course, the central romance. The romance between Danny and Jamie, I definitely was not expecting. In fact, going into this, I thought it was it was going to be her and Oliver Jackson-Cohen's character that hook up, because, they're, like, credited as the two main characters, but I thought that threw us off pretty nicely. I think a lot of people thought that as well, and so when we eventually get the reveal that Danny is a lesbian and that she does have feelings for Jamie, it just works so well. And what I like about that romance is that you don't realize how integral that really is to the story. They have a lot of great interactions throughout the season, where Jamie, you can see the relationship she has with her, how much she cares for her. One of Jamie's first lines is like, do you find her, is she, like, talking about, like, her physical attraction and things like that. So you could always tell that there was a connection there, but it isn't really till the end of the show when we realize just how vitally important that relationship really was, and especially for Danny, how important that was, because this is her kind of getting closure, with the death of her friend that she very much did care about, but was not interested in romantically. She was engaged to him, but she didn't really care about him in the way that he cared about her, and so you get the sense that this is something that has been nagging at her. And I've heard a lot of people say, like, why did they just drop it after this episode? That wasn't an issue for me, because I felt like Danny got the closure she did through talking this out with Jamie. If you notice in the first few episodes, Danny has issues with, first, really admitting her feelings to Jamie. She doesn't want to kiss her. She doesn't want to engage in anything, romantic-wise with her. But then eventually she does, and I thought that that was something that worked very well in this show. I was very impressed by the way they developed that romance, and I think, we'll talk about more with the finale, but I think just that whole romance was very well done, and then contrasting that with the Peter Quint and Rebecca Jessel romance, I mean, holy shit, that one is so crazy, the way that whole thing went down. It's so toxic, it's so destructive. The fact that these two were in this relationship, and basically everything that he did was, he literally just dropped things with Flora and Miles just so he could, like, have sex with her, and, like, he wanted to go away to America with her, but then he turned into a ghost and he couldn't do that. So then, instead of him possessing, instead of her, like, possessing him and going to, America, and trying to leave Bly Manor, he realizes he doesn't want to do that, so he literally drowns her. I mean, that whole story is so messed up and so twisted, but what I love about both of those characters is that you really do understand where both of them are coming from. While Peter Quint is such a horrible person, he's such a toxic and selfish character who literally is willing to do anything for his own self-interest. He doesn't care about really anyone else around him as long as he can get what he wants. He's willing to sacrifice his lover just so he can be with her, just so they both can be ghosts. He's willing to possess two innocent children just so that he can be ghost, just so he can, live the life that he wants and escape, this Bly Manor once and for all. He's trying to do that. We also understand it because he has a very tragic past. He was abused a lot as a kid, and he never really got closure for it, and it's only affected him more as he has gone on. And when I was talking about the two kids, this is what I was referring to. When we get the revelation that Miles and Flora have basically been going in and out of, Peter and Rebecca's bodies for, the whole show, it adds that much more of a weight to their characters. There's so much more clarity there. Why is Miles just randomly acting out? Why is he acting so much older? Why does Flora at times look to the side and look like she's talking to people? It all just makes sense after that. Why does Danny randomly see Peter Quint and then people don't see him? He just kind of disappears after that. What's going on there? It all just kind of makes sense at the end, and I really like the way they tied all of that together. I think every single thing they did regarding those characters, again, I thought was pretty much perfect, and I really loved the way that whole story played out. I was worried at first with the way the Peter and Rebecca storyline was playing out, because I'm like, I'm not really that into this, but once we got to the revelation of what was really going on there and what Peter did to Rebecca, and the fact that she was so regretful of it, she didn't want to be in this separation, she didn't want to be in this situation, she didn't want Flora to be trapped in her body forever so they could be reunited with their parents. I just thought was a really great arc for both of their characters, and really played into how just twisted of a romance that really was, and I thought they did a really good job with it. And again, all of these are, again, romantic sort of stories. The one with Hannah and Owen, they clearly had feelings for each other, but nothing really could come of it because Hannah died and Owen didn't. But we know at the end that something did come of it because he names the restaurant, after that conversation that they had. So clearly that's still a romantic thing. You have the whole thing with Peter and Rebecca. That definitely is still a romantic thing. And then, of course, the Danny and Jamie relationship. So it really is still a romance at the end of the day. Even the creations of Bly Manor, which I was never expecting us to get an entire episode about, for me, ended up being one of the most impactful episodes of the entire show. I think this episode is utterly perfect. I've heard a lot of people say that this episode is not necessary, and I could not disagree more, because I feel like without this episode, we don't really get a sense of what being utterly, trapped in this house can do to you, the weighing effects that it can have on you, the idea of isolationism, the idea of time slipping by, I think is something that's very well represented here in the story with Viola and Perdita, two sisters that are supposed to love each other. These are two sisters that once did have a loving relationship, but this guy got in the middle of it. This guy that really wasn't good at all, Arthur, or whoever he was, really was just there, I think, for finances and his own self-interest, and it caused the two sisters to turn against each other. They both ended up dying. Viola became the Lady of the Lake pretty much after that. But of course, what's the one thing that Viola held on to? That was her love for her daughter. That never changed. Even when people started to suddenly forget about her and she started to fade, which that was a great concept, I thought. The idea that once you're forgotten about in this house, you literally start to fade away. You don't have your facial features start to go away, and then you start to look old and rugged, and I think that is such a just crazy idea to think about. I think that's something that is so terrifying, but I think it's something that was so well represented in the show and perfectly divorced it from that of Hill House, where that's not really something they got into. It was kind of once you're dead, you're a ghost. Bly Manor really got into the intricacies of what being a ghost does to you, how that really works, what the process is in all of that. And I really loved this idea that Viola is forgotten about, and so she becomes the Lady of the Lake, but she doesn't change her mission. She just forgets who she's looking for, and so any child she sees now, she thinks is her daughter, and that's why all these murders are happening. That's why, all these weird, that's why the manor is pretty much cursed in that way, and I think that was a really great direction to take the show in. It made so much sense with everything that was going on. The reason why nobody could actually die and stay dead, I think it's just so great. It's something that a lot of shows just don't really explain. We have a lot of ghost shows where people just kind of stay alive, and you're like, how is this happening? So I like that we had, for once, an entire episode that explained that to you. I think that was fantastic. I loved that. I thought it was one of the best parts of the show. So I really loved the way all of that played out for sure. And of course, there's that moment where Viola, sees this child in the bed, and she doesn't realize that that isn't her daughter, and it's that might be the most heartbreaking moment of the whole show. That scene gets me every single time. It's an image that's going to stay in my mind forever. I don't know what it is. It's just something about the way that kid looks at Viola, not knowing who she is, but then Viola feeling compelled to, pick up the child as if it's her own. Just so many just amazing moments just in that episode alone, and I really just could do a whole video just about how much I adore that episode, because there's just so much to analyze about it. And again, even the way they get into some of the characters' regrets. I already talked about Danny's with, the guy that she accidentally killed in that, when he got hit by that truck and things like that. But even Henry's, where he has this regret of being Flora's father. We realize that he was actually in an affair with Flora's mother, and he's actually her biological father. Henry's not a huge character on this show, but you still understand every single thing that he's doing, why he stepped away, because he is so hesitant to be involved in her life. Even though, yes, her, father is dead, even though her parents are dead, he still doesn't know what role he has there. He doesn't know if he wants to tell her the truth. And so I like that we do get that moment in the finale where he finally decides, no, I'm going to be involved. I'm not going to step back anymore. I'm going to do something to save her. And I think that was a really great moment overall. And getting into the finale, I think this was pretty much perfect. And I think there's really no disputing that. For me, this is the best episode, maybe of both Bly Manor and Hill House, period. Well, I don't know if it's better than the one that was the one that was a one take, and it was the two sets, and it was that whole that whole crazy set that they came up with, in the in the funeral episode in Hill House. I don't know if it was better than that, but it's certainly on the level of those episodes for me. Everything about this finale, I think, just wraps up so well. Whether it's whether it's the moment where Danny is able to save Flora just by uttering those words, finally for good intent. They've always been used in a sinister context, and it's really good to see them for once actually being used in a good way. It shows how pure and how good of a person Danny really was. It's one of the many instances in this episode that really highlights that. But, you get this moment where she saves Flora, and all of the ghosts pretty much are also saved. They don't have to be stuck in this house anymore. They're basically out of this purgatory, whatever way you really want to look at it. And I loved the way that all wrapped up. But I wasn't expecting things to end so early. I knew that there definitely was going to be more there. And so knowing that the Lady of the Lake is still in Danny, even though I was loving that Jamie and Danny's relationship was flourishing, that they were able to have these 5 amazing years together. They were able to work on that relationship and take it further. You knew that it wasn't going to last forever, because the Lady of the Lake is still there, and eventually will take hold of Danny, and eventually she will become the Lady of the Lake, and the whole cycle is going to start again. And so you knew knew that eventually Dani was going to do something to break that cycle, because there was just no way that she was going to hurt Jamie. You know, she just wasn't going to do that to her. And so the moment where Jamie, you know, wakes up and realizes that Dani isn't there, goes all the way back to Bly Manor, and Dani has drowned herself, making sure that this doesn't happen again. It's devastating for sure, but there's also something deeply beautiful about it, because it shows that in the end, this relationship was the one that was able to survive. It was the only relationship in the show that actually had somewhat of a happy conclusion, because Dani wanted to end things in a way where they didn't end up having to kill each other. It's the only relationship where they didn't end up turning on each other. And I think it really highlights just how special that relationship really was. So even though it's obviously devastating what ended up happening, it's also beautiful, because in the end, Dani did choose Jamie. Dani chose that Jamie was, you know, she loved her enough to not let this happen to her. And I loved the way that that ended up playing out. And then the way we end things, realizing that this storyteller who, yeah, of course, I could not reveal that Carla Gugino is in this series, which I thought was such a great reveal, the way they did that. You know, the way that they were able to hide that until, like, a few hours before the show premiered, because I did see the thing on Twitter that they leaked, but still not knowing who she was, I thought was just brilliant. And we get this moment where we realize, wait, this was Jamie all along. This is how she is in this wedding. And the wedding is actually Flora's wedding. And it makes sense why Flora doesn't have a English accent. You know, you could look at it as either Flora doesn't have an English accent because, well, her and Miles got away from Bly Manor when they were pretty young, and they have no memories of what happened there other than they used to live there. They don't have any of the really terrifying memories of what happened, but you can also look at it as Jamie reveals that, like, a bunch of the story, and this is something I did not pick up at first, all of the details, you know, that Jamie revealed are pretty much fictional. There actually isn't a Bly Manor. There is a place that's like that, potentially, you know, in England somewhere. She doesn't specify where, but she says for sure that there is not a Bly Manor that exists. And so when she's having this conversation with Flora, and Flora, you know, is worried that maybe this could happen to her husband one day, who was Greg Sestero, of all people, by the way. That was a really cool reveal. I was not expecting for him to ever be involved in something like this, but it's cool to see him get in on the act. And again, what amazing casting by Flanagan there. But, you know, she's worried that this could happen to her husband, and Jamie's trying to tell her to, like, keep the faith. And we get that great line where Flora's like, this isn't a ghost story, it's a love story. And then Jamie talks about how really both are interchangeable, because they are in the day. Even though Dani became, you know, a ghost, their love is still there. Jamie never lost that love that she had for Dani. In fact, she's been, you know, she has been since then, pretty much taking every opportunity she can to reunite herself with her, whether it's through a bathtub, whether it's through a sink, whether it's just, like, looking over her shoulder. She has convinced herself that Dani is one day going to return to her. And, you know, it's something where you kind of get the sense that maybe she's done this all along. And while the ending is very much up to interpretation, whether Dani is there or not, I'm willing to bet that she was. I think Dani has always been looking over her. I think, in a way, Dani has always been there. You know, I'm not entirely sure how that all works out, but I think that it makes a lot of sense that Dani is still somewhat there in some way. And I thought that was a very effective way to wrap things up overall. And again, just the way they were able to tie everything together, I just thought was perfect. I really don't have any complaints when it comes to this finale. I think they really ended things in the best way that they possibly could. It really just felt like they left all cards on the table, and it just felt like everything connected pretty much perfectly. You know, you got the sense that Miles and Flora were able to live these great lives after they left Bly Manor. So did Owen, so did Henry, and so did Jamie. She just had to do so without Dani, unfortunately. And yes, it's tragic, but it's there again, there's also something that's really deeply beautiful about it, because Jamie is still telling that story. Jamie still has that love for Dani. It's never left. It's just you know, she's not actually there. And I think that's something that the show just summed up so well, and it was just the perfect way, I think, to really wrap things up overall. So overall, guys, The Haunting of Bly Manor is yet another great series from Mike Flanagan. It does retain the scares and the emotion that that show had, but it also has a deeply romantic and very different feel than that show did. The performances are out of this world, especially from the new actors. They really do kill it for sure. The ensemble is just... everyone in this show is just perfection. I don't know how they do it. The writing is superb. The dialogue is everything that you want it to be. There are some generally horrifying moments within this show. I think that the story itself is one that is going to take some time for some people, but just give it some patience, be a little patient with it, and it will definitely deliver in the way that you want it to. No, it isn't like Hill House really at all, but I think as a follow-up, it is very much what we needed. It really does speak to the genius of Mike Flanagan. It shows how versatile he can be as a creator, and I don't know what else he has moving forward in terms of the show. I don't know if he plans to do a third installment, but whatever it is, I will be endlessly looking forward to it, no matter what it ends up being moving forward. It'll definitely be one of my most anticipated things. If it can be even half as good as both of these shows, I will be excited moving forward. Overall, I absolutely adored pretty much everything about this show. I think that it is definitely one of my favorite things of the entire year, and I'm definitely going to give The Haunting of Bly Manor overall in A. But over, guys, in my review, The Haunting of Bly Manor. Let me know what you guys saw this show overall. Left your thoughts in it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.